The San Francisco 49ers got some competing news from two former excellent athletes in the NFL. What does a professor of orthopedic surgery have to say about it? I'm going to tell you in a sec, but the spoiler is it's excellent news. Later in the show, the 49ers signed a burner, and we're going to talk about that too. If you're new here, I'm Nate, and I love talking the 49ers. Please consider a like and sub. I very much appreciate it. Dr. Nirav Pandey, who specializes in sports medicine for athletes, was on The Game today. Listen to what he had to say about Ed McCaffrey's take on what's going on with his son, Christian McCaffrey.
This is from Christian McCaffrey's dad, Ed McCaffrey, talking about his Achilles tendonitis that's bilateral. Let's listen to this and let you react.
You hear all these medical terms. Look, if you have tendonitis, you have tendonitis. I don't know. I think of it like tennis elbow. You've seen tennis players get it, and then they can't play tennis for a while until it heals up. He just has that in his Achilles. And really just start it with one, and then like that kind of creeps into your calf, and then you start overcompensating, then you start feeling it in the other one. But it's just tendonitis. So I wouldn't get overly complicated, which means it's very, very sore. So I don't know if you've ever had an Achilles injury, but if you have, you know, it's pretty hard to run when you have an Achilles injury. And so I think the team decided, hey, let's be smart with this. Let's look at our schedule. It's the beginning of the season. We don't need to put you out there at 70%. Let's get you 100% and hopefully be ready to go. So they put him on IR. And so it's not up to him. Those are, by the way, doctor's decision. He doesn't decide. He's like, I'll go if you want me to go. And they watch him run and work out and they're like, you know what, this doesn't make sense.
There's something here, by the way, and I'm going to get back to Nirav Pandey's answer to Ed McCaffrey here as well. But this is very, very interesting what we're getting from Ed McCaffrey right now. We're getting a very, very a beautiful picture, an insight into how the 49ers are handling this and how it has a lot more. It's not even so much huge fear of major injury. It's what he's doing right now. If he's not able to run with the right form, then that's going to have potentially downstream effects in other ways that could affect this injury or could affect future injuries as well. Very interesting and overall picture on what this looks like, and in some ways confirming what we all kind of thought. Let's get back to what Ed McCaffrey had to say and then hear Nirav Pandey's response.
You're injured. Let's wait till this thing settles down. And the only treatment is rest.
Okay, that's from Ed McCaffrey. Doc, what do you think?
I think that does capture it pretty well. I mean, I think in general with Achilles tendonitis, even though we're worried about that, relatively small risk of rupture, 4 to 10%, it honestly is pain and inflammation. And if an athlete has pain, then it's really up to their body in terms of when they're ready to go out there. And if a doctor or the trainers see that, hey, you're pushing through, but your mechanics are off, we don't want you to get injured, then that's really the decision that you make. So I think absolutely the mainstay of treatment is rest. That's what they're doing. The fact that it's bilateral is not super surprising. It's either going to come from overuse of both tendons or you're going to compensate a little bit. So I think what he's saying is true. And I think at the end of the day, what this all comes down to, timelines and treatments and all this other stuff aside, it's how he feels. And if he feels good, he can play. Doesn't matter what the MRI shows, but if he doesn't have pain, he can perform on the field. He'll be back. That's what makes it frustrating because we don't know when that'll be. But I think this concern about, is this going to lead to like a traumatic injury down the road? I think it's more about, can he be pain-free and can he perform on the field?
So that is news to me because my concern up now, I have heard Dr. Nirav Pandey talk about this before. He did caveat all of that to say that we're talking about a different level of individual. That data, that 4 to 10% chance of rupture is kind of a broad stroke of data. And when you're talking about a very specific individual in a very specific situation who's one of the hardest runners in the National Football League and what the wear and tear on his body versus what an average person, we don't really know how that's going to compare. But in general, this is positive news about Christian McCaffrey. And we got to get to what he had to say about Richard Sherman's take. We'll get to in just a second. But I think this is positive news that one from Ed McCaffrey kind of, maybe bringing it down just a little bit. Let's all calm down a little bit about how intense we're all taking this. We are talking about intense soreness. We're not trying to act like that's nothing. It is something. And yes, you don't want to rupture your Achilles. And so, yeah, you want to be careful. But let's also not turn it into something more intense than it actually is. And this made me feel a lot better, both what Ed had to say and how Dr. Pandey had to responded to it or interpreted it and agreed with it. So that's all positive. Now, here's the next bit that gets really interesting.
So there's no clear line between a tendonitis like this that would eventually result in a rupture.
Yeah, I think it's without knowing the MRI and not knowing how bad this is. I think the vast majority of people are going to basically do fine. It's going to be problematic. Yes, there's a risk there, but 90% of athletes are not going to have that rupture. Where the line gets blurry is that each athlete responds differently to this. So, a lineman may respond differently than a running back. Someone who has tons of inflammation may not have a lot of pain. Someone with a little inflammation may have tons of it. So it's so variable. I think we just wait and see. And yes, we talk about 4 to 6 weeks from a treatment, but really it's about how his body responds. And it sounds like he's going to start running, which is a very good sign.
Okay, so and this is part of what you've already answered, but I just kind of want to double back on it because Richard Sherman, who suffered bilateral tendonitis, sort of indicated this week that when you're in this situation, it's kind of, quote, a matter of time until one of them ruptures. And then for him, one of them did. So would you kind of dispute that, though?
I would, yeah. I think we have a tendency to concentrate on the athletes who have Achilles tendonitis to get a rupture. But if the vast majority of them don't, if you look at big, huge studies that have looked at this in people, it's 4 to 10% of a risk. So it absolutely is not the inevitable process. There are probably more athletes walking around with Achilles tendonitis that don't get reported on injury reports. So it's a risk. It's there. But the vast majority of athletes won't tear their Achilles. It's a risk, but you got to make sure that you do the right things.
That is fantastic news. I imagine you have to agree with me on that. That is fantastic news. Now, obviously, 4 to 10%, still 4 to 10%. There's still a 1 in 10 shot, let's say, for a guy who's, using his Achilles as intensely as he is. We're saying at least a 1 in 10 shot that this could still happen to him. And so, yes, you understand precautions, but it's fantastic, in my opinion, that perspective that I somehow have been missing through all of this. So if you're like me and you've been missing it, then you maybe feel better about this. In other news today, and feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments about all this, of course, but Tariq Owens is back. This was an interesting one. Not that they brought Tariq Owens back. That doesn't entirely surprise me, but the way that they did it does surprise me. Actually, no, I'm going to be honest. It did surprise me. It did surprise me. I thought Tariq Owens had a weak training camp. I thought even in OTAs, there was a lot of hype around him, and there was a little bit of, I don't know. We'll see what we get out of this guy. And there's an interesting play here in terms of what this means on the practice squad. Now, there are kind of two possibilities for practice squads. It depends on your roster. It depends on what you're hoping to get out of it, of course. But as far as I'm concerned, you have a roster. Your practice squad is your backup for your roster. And so the main job is there are guys, the best possible guys you could possibly get that are backups to your roster. So if a guy goes down, another guy goes down, the depth guy goes down, we got a guy on the practice squad who can fill that role. That's what that's for, right? But there's this other side that I think Kyle Posey has a really interesting take on what's going on here with Tariq Owens coming back. So I'm going to show you what he had to say about it. I think it's pretty fascinating. 49ers released defensive tackle Shaquille Brown on Tuesday, leaving 2 open spots on their practice squad. Owens, who sustained a hand injury before training camp that sidelined him, will take one of those spots. When it comes to the practice squad, the 49ers are thinking long-term and big picture at wide receiver. Owens gives them a developmental prospect with a high upside. A developmental prospect with a high upside. We'll come back to that. During training camp, Owens was inconsistent with his catching technique, but had plenty of speed to burn and caught a few passes deep after getting behind the defense. I wonder if this means the end of the road for Ronnie Bell. If not, Chris Conley is a free agent after this year and will be 33. Owens and Terrace Marshall will likely sign future deals this offseason and compete for the final WR6 spot on the roster heading into 2025. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that could happen, a lot of other movement that could take place, injuries that haven't happened that could happen, knock on wood. But, I agree with Kyle Posey's take a lot here because this does not at all in any way, shape, or form scream, here's a guy who's ready to be a backup. This does not tell me Tariq Owens is not a finished product. He is very far from a finished product. And you've got the family, you've got the Terrell Owens thing, you've got the 49ers connection, whatever. You make of that what you want. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, if the kid isn't good, Kyle Shanahan's not bringing him onto this team. And the fact that Kyle Shanahan's brought him onto this team tells you that he sees potential in him. But he's not a guy that's going to go in right now. He's not going to switch places with Ronnie Bell right now. Not even Ronnie Bell. That's not going to happen. Now, does this mean the end of Ronnie Bell? It's very possible. That's very possible. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if Ronnie Bell's gone, Tariq Owens is not the next man up in his position. Okay? Now, we have yet to see a lot from Jacob Cowing. I've got a couple of comments that I have not responded to yet, and I apologize. I will get to you related to Jacob Cowing and what's going on with Jacob Cowing. And he's clearly not shown enough, to the coaching staff to get out there and get those reps at wide receiver. We've obviously seen him in special teams, punt return, but we have not seen him in a wide receiver role, and that's because presumably he's not shown enough to actually earn it. And there's a lot that it takes to earn Kyle Shanahan's trust in the wide receiver role. You can obviously lose that trust. I think Ronnie Bell lost a lot of that trust from Kyle Shanahan. But all of this being said, I think the way that Kyle Posey wrote this is absolutely accurate. Owens gives them a developmental prospect with a high upside. And that's it. That's all that you're getting out of Tariq Owens. You're hoping that you get to develop him. You're hoping that you get time with him. He's going to benefit, of course, from it as well. It's unfortunate that the young man has not, I don't know. I don't even want to say like lived up to his father's, expectations or something like that. Like that's a stupid way to look at it. But it's unfortunate for him that he has not been able to reach the standard that the 49ers were looking for, because I think it was a really exciting prospect because of his family history. But what it does show, and I am excited about this, that, if anybody can turn Tariq Owens into a valuable wide receiver, I think the development is right there on this roster, and the development's right there, in this coaching staff. Kyle Shanahan can turn him into a valuable wide receiver in this league. And so Kyle Shanahan loves a project. He loves a wide receiver project, and we'll never know the world in which Brandon Marshall. What is happening with me today? My head is all over the place. Brandon Aiyuk. That we don't know the world in which Brandon Aiyuk gets drafted by a different team and has to go through their processes, and we see what happened. If he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, what would have happened? If he was with whatever team you want, name one of the other 31 teams. We don't know what that world will look like. But we do know that wide receivers under Kyle Shanahan tend to make or break, and a lot of times we get a lot out of them. I think Kyle Shanahan gets the best out of his wide receivers. I think that's part of what makes him an excellent coach, part of his player development side. I think he gets the best out of his quarterbacks too, at least quarterbacks that fit his system at the very least. And I think getting the most out of his quarterbacks, like we saw with Jimmy Garoppolo, who then could not continue to replicate that later in his career, so far at least. I think that we could see similar skill development take place under Kyle Shanahan's leadership for Tariq Owens, and I think that's cool. That's an awesome opportunity. I just think we need to also call a spade and recognize that this is not 100%, all credit to Kyle Posey because he said it first, but this is not a player who you're expecting to be on the football field this season at all. It is a player that you're hoping to develop and you're hoping has the upside that you're looking for. He does not have even a Jacob Cowing. Well, even Jacob Cowing's lightning fast. He does not have Jacob Cowing kind of speed. So when I say he's a burner, I'm saying that's what Kyle Posey's calling him. He's a burner. So I'm quoting him on that. I believe he ran like a 4.5 40. So he's fast. He's not a 4.3 40 kind of fast. So we'll have to see how this plays out. If he can continue to develop his ball catching technique, which I believe was kind of the big criticism that came out somewhere between OTAs and early training camp. If he can develop his ball catching technique, if he can develop his route running skills and continue to get improvement in there, then maybe he's got a shot. Maybe he's got a shot on the future of this football team. But we have too many guys that are coming up right now. Jacob Cowing, Ricky Pearsall. We have too many guys on this team that are going to be vying for that WR6 role or WR5, depending on how you look at things, role going into next year. And I do believe that Kyle Posey is right in saying that this is where you're probably seeing your Tariq Owens of the world, your Terrace Marshalls of the world, guys that are probably going to be, fighting for that WR6 role in the future. That currently that Ronnie Bell spot, but not really much anymore. I'm excited to see Jacob Cowing, of course. excited to see when he's ready. Ricky Pearsall, of course, as well. I think there's still a lot to see out of those young individuals before we start getting down to the likes of the Tariq Owens in terms of just, current expectations. That's all I mean. I'm not trying to do draft class or anything like that because I've made too many arguments on Brock Purdy's behalf, to be, criticizing based on where guys were or were not drafted. All right, that's all I got for you today. I'm feeling optimistic about this game against the Arizona Cardinals. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be with you along the ride all the way through it, so I'm looking forward to it. As always, what a time to be alive.